I'd like to say something about the spiritual sciences and why the spiritual sciences or spirituality actually is a domain for the future, and maybe the most important domain for the future, maybe the most important discipline to develop in the future, and why this is so. It's really important to understand the reason why spirituality is important, and the reason why spiritual sciences is important, because the truth is that spirituality should actually be a spiritual science. If it is only spirituality, that's not enough. You know, a guru in a white gown with flowers around his neck is rubbish. You know, that's not enough. That's not what we need. We need neuroscience. We need spiritual science. We don't need a selfish, narcissistic man who has suddenly found out that he is the new Jesus. We can all be the new Jesus. It's not difficult. If we really want to be the new Jesus, it's not difficult. We can just access the Christ heart in us and stay in that area all the time. Then you will become the new Jesus in a way. It's easy to establish that. So we don't need a cartoon character. We don't need a cartoon guru or a cartoon Jesus. What we need is a spiritual science. What we need is truth. What we need is true research and valid information. And I'd like to say something about why is it that I, as a philosopher, as an artist and a philosopher, go so deeply into spirituality, or into that which I see or call as the spiritual sciences. The reason is this. I do that simply because philosophy is dead. Philosophy is dead. It's just how it is. Philosophy is dead, literature is dead, art is dead. This is because the narrative is dead. This is because the validity of the narrative is not there anymore. The validity of the narrative is gone. It's just a creation, and it's just something that is created by language. The narrative is dead, and the narrative relies, the validity of the narrative relies on elements that also lack validity, namely the validity of the self, the validity of the human self. I'm not a big fan of Professor Stephen Hawking. I think that especially about when it comes to the understanding of space and things like that, I'm not a big fan of Stephen Hawking, but of course he was a really smart and good scientist, and he said something that is very worthy of attention, because he actually one time or another he said that philosophy is dead, and that made me very happy, because that's true. That's completely true. Philosophy is dead. Science is still valid because science can never stop. You know, science will always develop. But philosophy as a narrative is dead. And that's just how it is. And many university professors don't understand this. Because they are stuck in the narrative about philosophy and philosophical paradigms. Simply because that's their work, you know. It's their job to be an expert on Immanuel Kant, or on Schopenhauer, or on Sartre, or on David Hume, or on Plato, or on Descartes, or Wittgenstein, or Karl Jaspers, or Merleau-Ponty, or whatever, you know. And they refuse to educate themselves. You know, the worst thing about professors is that they refuse to educate themselves. They really hate education. They really hate post-education. When they have their PhD and their professor title, they don't want to educate themselves anymore. They are very happy and hunky-dory. No problem. They have a PhD and they are a professor with tenure. in a respected university, they don't need any education. They don't want any knowledge. They don't want any information. They don't want to update the silly, stupid program that's running around in their brain, which is just an interpretation of a paradigm, right? It's just an interpretation of a language game, which results in a projection, and that projection becomes their work. So when a professor teaches philosophy, he is just presenting a projection that comes from his interpretation of already established paradigms or philosophical dogmas or philosophical narratives, you could say. And this is what we have to get out of, because that's so childish and we don't need it, and we have to educate our professors. We have to tell them that, look, if you want to drive around in your car and go to work in the morning as a professor, you have to educate yourself, honey. That's just how it is. Don't start to cry. Don't wet your pampers. You just have to accept it, sweetie baby. You have to accept it. Educate yourself. And education today is simply neuroscience and all the stuff that I'm talking about, that the validity of the language game, the validity of language itself, the validity of our belief in the validity of thought and language. These things are very relevant, very, very, very relevant. And this is why spirituality is so important, and this is why spirituality and what we hopefully one day can call the spiritual sciences is perhaps the domain for the future, because it improves psychology and psychiatry immensely. It can solve many questions in psychology and in psychiatry and give huge benefits to mental health and to the understanding of the human program in itself. And of course my work has been to present the understanding of the human program. It is perhaps the future of philosophy, the spiritual sciences, because the spiritual sciences is the point, is the merging point, is the crossing point of neuroscience and psychology, you could say, is the meeting point of neuroscience and psychology in some sense. And of course it has to do with energetic fields and yoga, classic, orthodox, real, true education about yoga as well. I mean, it goes very deep. It goes into understanding the whole totality of the human being. It goes into the whole understanding of the totality of the human being. And when it comes to the understanding of the totality of the human being, psychology is not enough. Psychiatry is not enough. The somatic physical sciences is not enough. Philosophy is absolutely not enough, because philosophy is usually just a label, a sticker to put on a window. Philosophy is a concept, it's a construct, it's a narrative that lacks validity. It's an interpretation of phenomena that we haven't yet deciphered and understood. And that is something that neuroscience will help us gain insight into in the future. But these are the crucial things, these are the important things, and this is why the spiritual sciences is so important, because it touches onto, latches onto, and it enters both psychology, psychiatry, somatic, physical health sciences, self-understanding, of course, anything. It affects the totality of the human being. And this is why the spiritual sciences is so important. And that's why people who are so-called academics should never laugh about spirituality or spiritual sciences, because a spiritual scientist can decipher a little professor in 2 seconds. That's not difficult. If you understand the human program, then you can pick any professor apart in a second or two, because it's all built on the belief in the validity of a certain set of narratives. That's what it is. So, and you can explain this if you really understand this deeper, the hidden architecture, you could say, of the human program, then you can explain this. You can go step by step and decipher the whole university. You can deconstruct the whole academic world if you just have time enough to do so. So this is really important. But of course, professors and academics, they hate this and they refuse to accept it and they don't like it. And they want to stay stuck, in their little barn, in their little video game room where they grew up until they were 17 or 23 years old. I mean, they just don't want to get out of their paradigm. They don't want to get out of the little narrative that they're sucking on, because that little narrative is what gives them pleasure and happiness and family and kids and cars and dogs and summer houses and salaries and reputations and articles in the newspaper and all of this and all of that. So they don't want to give that up. They're perfectly fine in that little narrative of theirs, and this is why things are very slow to progress. It takes time to make clever people understand truth, because they think they're so clever, they think they're so smart. It's only the true genius or the talent who knows how to extract knowledge out of anything that he's presented with, who doesn't stop learning, who knows that, this is something. This canvas it takes a long time to decipher, really. If we want to analyze this canvas, the totality of our beingness, so to speak, then we have to be careful and go step by step and be meticulous about it, careful about it, and research it from different angles. Even from below, as Glenn Gould says, that if you really want to get into music, you have to play from below and not from above. This is, in some sense, also relevant for the sciences, because you have to look from underneath. You have to look into each and every crack. You have to examine the table, not only from the outside. You have to really look at it from below. You have to see the table from below. How is this table constructed? It's like that. And that table is just the narrative that people believe in, So when you see the construction of the table for what it truly is, then you are beginning to understand how narratives are constructed and constituted. And then you will be able to teach in a university. Slowly. In some way or another. But anyway, this is a word on why the spiritual sciences is a domain for the future. This is a word on why spirituality is extremely important for the human being. This is why spirituality, inner heart explorations and all of this are truly, really helpful and beneficial and really appropriate to engage in. It's a very important practice. And if we see spirituality as something that we actually could and should call the spiritual sciences, then it gets more interesting as well, because it's an open field where everyone is allowed to do their own research. We can all make our own interpretations. We can learn from this, we can learn from that. And most of all, we can get the benefit and enjoy and see all the golden stuff that were made in the past, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, perhaps even 4,000 years ago, if we are able to find that as well. So, true spirituality, or self-insight, inner introspective insight, is immensely important, and it has huge implications for psychology, psychiatry, for somatic physical health, for anything, for the understanding of science too. because it has to, if you understand the spiritual sciences, then you also have to decipher the language game. And if you can decipher the language game, then you will understand 30% of what science is about, or at least 30% of what the problems that lie ahead of science and scientific models are. Because language is a tricky thing, it's very difficult. So, we should send language in the big collider in CERN, in the big hadron collider in CERN. The scientific community institute CERN in Switzerland and France, but Switzerland mainly. Yes, and we should put the whole of language and the human brain and the human program and everything into the hadron collider and see how purified and how enlightened we can become after we have seen how the knots in our mental realities, the small little neuroses that we create, and also that which creates our projections, because it's usually a neurosis in the human program that creates a lot of projections. There's a neurosis in the human program that leads to certain interpretations and projections. I think I've talked about that before. But anyway, you get my point. This is my point. This is why the spiritual sciences is important for the future, and we should all respect the fact that we need spirituality and spiritual sciences and religion and all of these things that feeds the heart and makes us understand the mind. The Buddhist philosophy, I've said for a million years, I don't have to repeat that, contains practically all you need to know, about body and mind, if you really find the right scriptures. I mean, it's the heritage of the spiritual sciences, let's say it like that. The heritage of the spiritual sciences are enormous, and they are of great value for mankind. And this domain should be, actually, I don't know if it will be, but it should be the domain of the future. The spiritual sciences should be the domain of the future, because that's where we can be honest and clear and clairvoyant and decent and righteous and just, because it's a place for honesty, it's a place for earnestness, it's a place for sincere reflection, it's a place for sincere investigation. And that's really what we need in our communities today. That's what we need in society today. Sincere reflections, sincere activity, sincere reflection, sincere dialogue. We need to open our reflections in a humble or sincere way, so that we can cleanse our mind from the conditioned programs, the conditioned software that we basically live our lives in, and which we have to release ourselves from, or at least see from the outside, if we want to gain deeper knowledge about ourselves. And when we do that, when we gain deeper knowledge about ourselves, we can see the human program, and then we can start to educate the world, and then we can have a community and a society, and humanity can start to resemble and look like that which it should be in the first place. Spiritual science is a way to get humanity back on track. The spiritual sciences is a way to get humanity back into humanity. The spiritual sciences is a way for the human being to see himself, and therefore also to create a better world. Thank you.